So in this video, we're going to be talking about Italy and the people that live there in the ancient world. One of the first things that you want to do when you're trying to understand another culture, which is one of the things we're trying to do here, we're trying to understand the Roman culture, the Roman mentality. One of the first things that you need to do is to look at the geography, especially when you're talking about an ancient people. The geography of a place is one of the things that is absolutely critical in shaping the needs and imperatives and values and priorities of an ancient culture. And so we need to look first at the geography of this peninsula that we call Italy. So if we were doing this in person, I would ask you to take a look at this map and tell me what it is that you see that sort of jumps out at you as something that would affect, that would shape the story of the people that live there. So let's just pretend that we can do that interactively. Just sort of shout out in your head what it is that you see on this map that might have an effect on the people that live there. I'll wait. So I'm sure some of you said, hey, look, this Italian peninsula is cut off by this giant mountain range to the north. Right. This is a key factor. It separates Italy from the rest of Europe. While Europe is doing one thing, Italy develops on its own. There's also a second mountain range that is critical to the story of Italy that sort of looks like a spine that runs down the peninsula. This is called the Apennine mountain chain. And what the Apennines do is they tend to separate off sections of Italy. And what we find is that there are peoples that settle in the areas that are delineated by the mountains. And then there are people that settle in the mountains themselves. One of the things that is critical to understand about the ancient world is that the people of the ancient world are connected by water. It is much more difficult to travel over land. Not only do we have mountains, as we've just been seeing, but there are also rivers, there are also other people in the way, there are bandits. It's difficult to travel over land in the ancient world. And until the Romans build them, rather late in the story that we're going to be looking at, until the Romans build them, there aren't actual solid, reliable roads that make the movement of large amounts of goods and peoples over land easy and inexpensive to do. Most of the ancient world moves its goods, peoples, and ideas by water. They're connected to each other by water. One of the things that you want to look at, therefore, is what is the geography of the water telling us? First of all, we have this massive sea in what is, to the people that live around it, the center of the world. And in fact, the Roman name for this is the Mediterranean Sea, the sea at the middle of the world. One of the things you might notice here is that there's a constricted passage between the western part of the Mediterranean Sea and the eastern part. A relatively narrow passage that is of great strategic value in terms of trade and in terms of military and political power. So take note of that. We'll be coming back to that in a moment. Italy is a peninsula, which means that it's defined by its coastlines. And so to the north we have the Adriatic. To the south we have the Tyrrhenian Sea. That's the official name for it. The main thing to note here, though, what's most important about this is that it's along this coastline that there's a great deal of interaction amongst the peoples that live there. You want to see a coastline like this as a series of ports that are interacting with each other. The movement of small ships up and down this coastline is creating a constant interaction between the peoples that live along the southern Italian coast, and they become more and more interconnected with each other in terms of trade, more and more connected with each other in terms of cultural interchange and the movements of peoples. So this is one of the things that you want to be seeing as you look at the shape of Italy itself. That southern coastline along the Tyrrhenian Sea is a coastline of interaction between peoples. A coastline divided partway along by the Tiber River, of great importance to the Romans, as we'll see. Well, all right, so who are these peoples? The original inhabitants of the peninsula of Italy, and when I say original, what this means is that we can't trace their story back any farther than, the original settlements that the archaeologists have dug up. We don't know where they come from. They seem to spring from the earth in this region. These are the Etruscans, for lack of a better word, the indigenous people of Italy, in that they arrived in Italy at some point in a lost and forgotten past. But these are the people that are already there when all the other people that eventually live in Italy show up. These are the people that are already there, already having a thriving city-state culture. The Etruscans are a collection of very independent city-states. There's 12 major city-states and maybe a dozen more. So on the order of a couple of dozen very isolated, very independent city-states that are spread out over this coastal flatland that nestles in the upper arm of the Apennines north of the Tiber River. Two of the ones that we'll be dealing with are Tarquinii and Veii. So the Etruscans are already there. They have this wealthy, thriving city-state culture at the beginning of the Iron Age. At some point early in the Iron Age, we start to see the movement of large tribes of Indo-European peoples, a people utterly alien to the Etruscans. The Etruscan language is not related to any other languages. The Etruscan people ethnically are unrelated to anyone else. This is part of the problem in trying to track their story back further than their original settlements in northern Italy. The Etruscans are an isolated and unique people. And we see this influx of tribal, pastoral, non-urban Indo-Europeans coming from the Indo-European homeland in the Ukraine originally. This is something that's happening throughout the ancient era, and there are a number of reasons for this, the migration of the Indo-European peoples. One is that the Indo-European peoples in their Indo-European homeland are decentralized, tribal, non-urban, pastoral. Pastoral means that their agriculture is focused on domesticated animals, and so they need a lot of grazing land for their goats and their sheep and their cattle and their horses. They need a lot of space, and so instead of building cities, they spread out over the grasslands. If your population starts to grow at all, you need new grasslands. You need new pasturage for your animals as you're expanding your population of animals and peoples. And so this results in the Indo-Europeans migrating outward as entire nations and coming down into the Mediterranean world, encountering the peoples that live there, and creating a synthesis that combines the Indo-European story and the story of the people that are indigenous to the Mediterranean lands. We see this happen over and over again in ancient history. It's part of the story of the Aegean Sea. The Indo-Europeans there are the Greeks who encountered the indigenous Minoan peoples. It's the story of the Persians arriving in Mesopotamia, encountering the Semitic peoples there. It's the story of the Hittites, one of the earliest and most successful Bronze Age cultures. The Hindus encountering the Harappans in the Indus Valley, and so on. And it's the story of Italy. These Indo-European tribal, non-urban goat herders migrate into Italy in waves, just as they do in the Aegean, just as they do in Persia, and in the Indus Valley and in Anatolia. They migrate into Italy in waves. Some of them end up staying in the north, and they're the people that the Romans referred to as the Gauls, also known as the Celts. Some of them stay on the far side of the Alps, and the Romans referred to them as the Gauls on the far side of the Alps, or the Transalpine Gauls. Some of them cross the Alps and settle on the upper reaches of the Po River, and these are the Gauls that live on this side of the Alps, the Cisalpine Gauls. They don't build cities. They herd their sheep and their goats and their cattle and their horses, and they live the way that their ancestors have always lived. Some of them pass further down and settle along the Apennines, and again continue their pastoral ways. And so there are a number of different peoples, these Indo-European peoples, that settle along the hills and retain their pastoral ways. The Marsi and the Samnites and the Aequi and the Volsci and the Oskans. All of these people are connected by language, connected by heritage, but they also live apart from each other, and they have their own stories and their own ideas. Some groups of Indo-Europeans migrate to the coastal lands, passing by the Etruscan cities, and admire the wealth and opportunities and possibilities that these city-states seem to offer in terms of strength and stability and prosperity. And so these guys come down south of the Tiber in the coastal flatlands there and create their own city-state community in emulation of the Etruscans. And these are the Latins, the Indo-European people that copied the Etruscan city-state way, built their own city-states, imported a good deal of Etruscan religious ideology and cultural elements and how kings ruled and how city-states function. The city of Roma is a large city, and it is in a very important place, namely the location where the Tiber can be easily forded. So that's the Indo-European peoples that come into Italy from the north. In the middle of the Iron Age, we also have the period in which the Greeks are expanding westward and settling colonies all around the Mediterranean world. And a number of Greek colonies are established in southern Italy and Sicily. The general term for this is Magna Graecia. Magna Graecia is made up of a large number of very wealthy Greek colonies. Three of the best known of these are Neapolis, which is now the city of Naples, still there thousands of years later. Tarentum, which is very influential on the heel of Italy. And Syracuse, which is an immensely successful commercial city, one of the wealthiest and most prestigious and splendid in terms of its display of wealth of any of the cities of the ancient world. And finally, we have the Phoenician traders who have established a number of significant outposts in this part of the world. The Phoenicians have a trading network that extends all through the Mediterranean Sea, and their market cities become thriving centers of commerce. The Phoenicians establish a presence on both the North African coastline and in Sardinia, the southernmost of the two large islands to the west of Italy. And they establish a number of colony cities that are there as hubs of their Mediterranean commerce. The most important of these is Carthage, established early in the Iron Age and rapidly becomes one of the most important centers of commerce and trade in this part of the world. And you'll notice its location. It's ideally positioned to control the movement of goods and ships between the west and the east. It sits right on top of that choking point in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is critical to the success of Carthage. Carthage's strategic value, its location for commerce and for military and political power over the western Mediterranean, is what eventually makes it Rome's ultimate nemesis. So the Romans are in the middle of all of these different cultures. On the one hand, they have their sheep-herding cousins in the mountains to the east, who like to raid the lands and territories of the flatlands below. And so part of Rome's early history is constantly fending off the encroachments of the hill peoples that are close to them to the east. Even more impactful on the Roman story is that to the north, to the south, to the west, the Romans are surrounded by cultures that are more ancient, more established, have a longer history, are wealthier, more sophisticated, more advanced than they are. The Etruscans in particular have a great deal of influence on the Romans. They show them what a city-state is in the first place, this idea of kingship. Key technologies, including writing. The Romans get their writing system from the Etruscans. The Latin alphabet was originally a version of the Etruscan alphabet, which the Etruscans got from trading with the Greeks. The Greeks got it from the Phoenicians. How the Etruscans interact with their gods. The Etruscans have a very deep-set belief that before the state undertakes any action, whether it's simply gathering the assembly or passing a law or installing an official, before the state undertakes any action, it must first consult the gods and determine whether the gods are okay with the state doing this thing. The Etruscans had a very ritualized way of approaching this. They had a special set of priests who undertook a religious ritual called haruspicia. Haruspicia is the act of consulting the gods by means of the entrails of animals. They would have a sacrifice of a goat or something like this, and they would cut open the liver and they would look for blemishes or anomalies, the location of which would be tied to a particular god or a particular part of the divine realm. We're looking at the model of a liver here that is marked out according to the locations that are associated with particular Etruscan gods. This had a great influence on the Latins and the Romans in particular. The Romans take this to heart even more intensely than the Etruscans. The idea that the gods must be consulted before any action of the state. The Romans use haruspicia as the Etruscan way of doing this in certain situations, but they develop a particularly Roman method of consulting the gods called augury, which involves an overnight vigil in which the sky is studied for portents, which would be interpreted according to the wisdom and lore of the priests as a positive or a negative omen. And so the movement of an eagle in a particular direction, for example, would be a positive omen, signifying the approval of the gods. Any kind of omen that can be interpreted negatively might cause the augurs to decide that the gods are not happy and that they need to be appeased before the state can undertake whatever it is that they want to do. A number of other elements of Etruscan culture and religion make their way into Rome, are adapted in Roman ways, but what the Romans focus on most of all is an identity that rejects what's most representative of Etruscan, Greek, Phoenician culture, which is to say, the Etruscans, the Greeks, the Phoenicians are wealthy and successful, and they display this wealth. They benefit from this wealth in terms of leisure. And so the Roman reaction to this is to define their cultural values, what it means to be Roman, by saying that to be Roman is to reject the ostentatious display of wealth, the accumulation of wealth. To be Roman is to be austere. To be Roman is to be self-sacrificing. To be Roman is to think of family ahead of the individual. To be Roman is to display valor on the battlefield rather than lying around on a couch writing poetry. These are the things that crystallize at the center of the Roman identity, and this happens as a product of the sort of early inferiority complex of being this brand new culture, this brand new city surrounded by more ancient, more sophisticated, more advanced, wealthier cultures in all directions. Originally, Rome is just one of the cities of Latium. And, the Latin cities in general are interacting with each other. There's movement in between them, and they're all sort of growing up together. They share the same gods. They celebrate festivals together, which has an impact on early Roman history, as we'll see. And there are certain things that are allowed between city-states that you don't see in other city-state cultures. You can transfer your citizenship from one Latin city to another. You can marry a citizen of another Latin city, and so forth and so on. The Latin cities are very close. They interact with each other in a much more interrelated way than other city-state cultures. But Rome starts to emerge as prominent in a way that gives the Romans a sense of leadership of the Latins. One of the reasons for this is geographic. The location of Rome is not a coincidence. The early settlements of Rome are positioned at a place where, as I mentioned, it is fairly easy to ford the Tiber River. And so there's a great deal of traffic of tradespeople and other migration north and south that passes through this location. The most important focal point is that open space just to the south of where the Tiber is forded, which is the cattle market, the Forum Boaro. And so there's a great deal of movement, not only across the Tiber, but also along the Tiber. There's a good deal of trade traffic between the shoreline, where the Tiber meets the Tyrrhenian Sea, and the salt mine. What all this traffic means is that not only is Rome strategically located, but the Romans develop an important sense that it's not enough just to retain your own identity and be inward looking and ignore everyone else. To be an important trading city means to commit to not only hospitality and the accommodation of the ways of others, but to the influx of ideas and peoples from those cultures, as some of them, set up shop in Rome and become permanent fixtures or migrate into Rome. Rome becomes more heterogeneous, more diverse. And so the Roman approach to protecting their own identity is to co-opt elements of these other cultures that are missing from Rome.
They take things that are useful to them and make them Roman. Even what we're looking at here, the Temple of Hercules in the Forum Boarum, is a case in point. Hercules is originally an Etruscan figure, and is actually someone who filters through a lot of the cultures of Italy. The stories that are told about Hercules in Italy are about the Italian identities that are found there. The story of how Hercules is bound up with the mythology of the Greek figure Hercules is a whole nother thing. The Etruscans have a great deal of early interaction with the Greeks and probably merged one of their own heroes with the story of Hercules. But Hercules is an Etruscan figure. The iconography of him as a muscular man carrying a club, this is the Etruscan version of Hercules. The Romans adopt Hercules and modify his name into a Latin version, Hercules, and make him a Roman figure that represents Roman strength, that represents Roman ideas of hospitality. And they develop stories about how Hercules was an early visitor to what would someday in the far future be the site of Rome. And he encounters a good man there who shares his food and home, and he encounters a bad man who steals his cattle. The fable here is about the virtues of hospitality and the mutual benefits of interaction with other cultures.
This is one of the things that we see in the readings about how the Romans look at their own early history. The Romans, as I mentioned in the other videos, the Romans look at their own history much later, from the other side of having built a Mediterranean empire. And so the story of the Romans is, what is the origin story of this power that dominates the Mediterranean world? And they're looking for characteristics of what made it possible for the early Romans to develop into this colossus. And what they identify is the mos maiorum, the ways of our ancestors, the critical Roman values, austerity, valor, loyalty to family, among others. And this trait of adaptability, this trait of finding what it is that Rome needs to survive its next crisis and co-opting it in a way that allows Rome to adapt and evolve. And we'll see that in action throughout the rest of the semester. For now, that's that.